Okay, we're in chapter 7 of Heidi, and the name of this chapter is Fräulein Rotmeyer Spends an Uncomfortable Day. And we're only going to read the first half of this chapter because it's a pretty long chapter. When Heidi opened her eyes on her first morning in Frankfurt, she could not think where she was. Then she rubbed them and looked about her. She was sitting up in a high white bed on one side of a large, wide room into which the light was falling through very, very long white curtains. And near the window stood 2 chairs covered with large flowers, and then came a sofa with the same flowers, in front of which was a round table. In the corner was a washstand with things upon it that Heidi had never seen in her life before. But now, all at once, she remembered that she was in Frankfurt. Everything that had happened the day before came back to her, and finally she recalled clearly the instructions that had been given her by the lady housekeeper as far as she had heard them. Do you remember? She fell asleep while the lady was giving her the instructions. Heidi jumped out of bed and dressed herself. Then she ran first to one window and then another. She wanted to see the sky and country outside. She felt like a bird in a cage behind those great curtains. But they were too heavy for her to put aside, so she crept underneath them to get to the window. But these again were so high that she could only just get her head above the sill to peer out. Even then she could not see what she longed for. In vain she went first to one and then the other of the windows. She could see nothing but walls and windows, and again walls and windows. Heidi felt quite frightened. It was still early, for Heidi was accustomed to get up early and run out at once to see how everything was looking. If the sky was blue and if the sun was already above the mountains, or if the fir trees were waving and the flowers had opened their eyes. As a bird, when it first finds itself in its bright new cage, darts hither and thither, trying the bars in turn to see if it cannot get through them and fly again out into the open, so Heidi continued to run backwards and forwards, trying to open first one and then the other of the windows, for she felt she could not bear to see nothing but walls and windows, and somewhere outside there must be the green grass and the last unmelted snows on the mountain slopes which Heidi so longed to see. But the windows remained immovable. Try what Heidi would to open them, even endeavoring to push her little fingers under them to lift them up. But it was all no use. When after a while Heidi saw that her efforts were fruitless, she gave up trying and began to think whether she would not go out and round the house till she came to the grass. But then she remembered that the night before she had only seen stones in front of the house. At that moment, a knock came to the door, and immediately after, Tinette put her head inside and said, "Breakfast is ready." Heidi had no idea what an invitation so worded meant, and Tinette's face did not encourage any questioning on Heidi's part, but rather the reverse. Heidi was sharp enough to read its expression and acted accordingly. So she drew the little stool out from under the table, put it in the corner, and sat down upon it, and there silently awaited what would happen next. Shortly after, with a good deal of rustling and bustling, Fräulein Rotmeyer appeared, who again seemed very much put out, and called out to Heidi, "What is the matter with you, Adelheid? Don't you understand what breakfast is? Come along at once." Heidi had no difficulty in understanding now, and followed at once. Clara had been some time at the breakfast table, and she gave Heidi a kindly greeting, her face looking considerably more cheerful than usual, for she looked forward to all kinds of new things happening again that day. Breakfast passed off quietly. Heidi ate her bread and butter in a perfectly correct manner, and when the meal was over, Clara wheeled back into the study. Excuse me. Fräulein Rotmeyer told her to follow and remain with Clara until the tutor should arrive and lessons begin. As soon as the children were alone again, Heidi asked, "How can one see out from here and look right down onto the ground?" "Oh, you must open the window and look out," replied Clara, amused. "But the windows won't open," responded Heidi sadly. Oh, yes, they will, Clara assured her. You cannot open them, nor I either. But when you see Sebastian, you can ask him to open one. It was a great relief to Heidi to know that the windows could be opened and that one could look out, for she still felt as if she was shut up in prison. Clara now began to ask her questions about her home, and Heidi was delighted to tell her all about the mountain and the goats and the flowery meadows, which were so dear to her. Meanwhile, her tutor had arrived. Fräulein Rottenmeier, however, did not bring him straight into the study, but drew him first aside into the dining room, where she poured forth her troubles and explained to him the awkward position in which she was placed, and how it had all come about. It appeared that she had written some time back to Herr Siesemann to tell him that his daughter very much wished to have a companion, and had added how desirable she thought it herself, as it would be a spur to Clara at her lessons and an amusement for her in her playtime. Fräulein Rottenmeier had privately wished for this arrangement on her own behalf, as it would relieve her from having always to entertain the sick girl herself, which she felt at times was too much for her. The father had answered that he was quite willing to let his daughter have a companion, provided she was treated in every way like his own child, as he would not have any child tormented or put upon, which was a very unnecessary remark, put in Fräulein Rottenmeier, for who wants to torment children? But now she went on to explain how dreadfully she had been taken in about the child, and related all the unimaginable things of which she had already been guilty, so that not only would he have to begin with teaching her the ABC, but would have to start with the most rudimentary instruction as regarded everything to do with daily life. She could see only one way out of this disastrous state of affairs, and that was for the tutor to declare that it was impossible for the two to learn together without detriment to Clara, who was so far ahead of the other that would be a valid excuse for getting rid of the child, and Herr Siesemann would be sure to agree to the child being sent home again. But she dared not do this without his order, since he was aware that by this time the companion had arrived. But the tutor was a cautious man and not inclined to take a partial view of matters. He tried to calm Fräulein Rottenmeier and gave it as his opinion that if the little girl was backward in some things, she was probably advanced in others, and a little regular teaching would soon set the balance right. When Fräulein Rottenmeier saw that he was not ready to support her and evidently quite ready to undertake teaching the alphabet, she opened the study door, which she quickly shut again as soon as he had gone through, remaining on the other side herself, for she had a perfect horror of the ABC. She walked up and down the dining room, thinking over in her own mind how the servants were to be told to address Adelaide. The father had written that she was to be treated exactly like his own daughter, and this would especially refer, she imagined, to the servants. She was not allowed, however, a very long interval of time for consideration, for suddenly the sound of a frightful crash was heard in the study, followed by frantic cries from Sebastian. She rushed into the room. There on the floor lay in a confused heap books, exercise books, inkstand, and other articles with the tablecloth on the top, while from beneath them a dark stream of ink was flowing all across the floor. Heidi had disappeared. "Here's a state of things," exclaimed Fräulein Rottenmeier, wringing her hands. "Tablecloth, books, work basket, everything lying in the ink. It was that unfortunate child, I suppose." The tutor was standing looking down at the havoc in distress. There was certainly only one view to be taken of such a matter as this, and that an unfavorable one. Clara, meanwhile, appeared to find pleasure in such an unusual event and in watching the results. Yes, Heidi did it, she explained, but quite by accident. She must on no account be punished. She jumped up in such violent haste to get away that she dragged the tablecloth along with her, and so everything went with her. There were a number of vehicles passing. That is why she rushed off like that. Perhaps she has never seen a carriage. Is it not as I said? She has not the smallest notion about anything, not the slightest idea that she ought to sit still and listen while her lessons are going on. But where is the child who has caused all this trouble? Surely she has not run away. What would Herr Seesman say to me? She ran out of the room and down the stairs. There at the bottom, standing in the open doorway, was Heidi, looking in amazement up and down the street. What are you doing? What are you thinking of to run away like that? Called Fräulein Rottenmeier. I heard the sound of the fir trees, but I cannot see where they are, and now I cannot hear them any more, answered Heidi, looking disappointedly in the direction whence the noise of the passing carriages had reached her, and which to Heidi had seemed like the blowing of the south wind in the trees, so that in great joy of heart she had rushed out to look at them. Fir trees! Do you suppose we are in a wood? What ridiculous ideas are these? Come upstairs and see the mischief you have done. Heidi turned and followed Fräulein Rottenmeier upstairs. She was quite astonished to see the disaster she had caused, for in her joy and haste to get to the fir trees, she had been unaware of having dragged everything after her. I excuse you doing this as it is the first time, but do not let me know of you doing it a second time, said Fräulein Rottenmeier, pointing to the floor. During your lesson time, you are to sit still and attend. If you cannot do this, I shall have to tie you to your chair. Do you understand? Yes, replied Heidi, but I will certainly not move again. For now she understood that it was a rule to sit still while she was being taught. Sebastian and Tinette were now sent for to clean up the broken articles and put things in order again. The tutors said good morning and left, as it was impossible to do any more lessons that day. There had been certainly no time for gaping this morning. Clara had to rest for a certain time during the afternoon, and during this interval, as Fräulein Rottenmeier informed Heidi, the latter might amuse herself as she liked. When Clara had been placed on her couch after dinner, and the lady housekeeper had retired to her room, Heidi knew that her time had come to choose her own occupation. It was just what she was longing for there was something she had made up her mind to do, but she would require some help for this accomplishment, and in view of this, she took her stand in the hall in front of the dining room door in order to intercept the person she wanted. In a few minutes, up came Sebastian from the kitchen with a tray of silver tea things, which he had to put away in the dining room cupboard. As he reached the top stairs, Heidi went up to him and addressed him in the formal manner she had been ordered to use by Fräulein Rottenmeier. Sebastian looked surprised and said somewhat curtly, "What is it you want, miss?" "I only wish to ask you something, but it is nothing bad like this morning," said Heidi, anxious to conciliate him, for she saw that Sebastian was rather in a cross temper and quite thought that it was on account of the ink she had spilled on the floor. "Indeed, and why, I should first like to know, do you address me like that?" replied Sebastian, evidently still put out. "Fräulein Rottenmeier told me always to speak to you like that," said Heidi. Then Sebastian laughed, which very much astonished Heidi, who had seen nothing amusing in the conversation. But Sebastian, now he understood that the child was only obeying orders, added in a friendly voice, "What is it then that Miss wants?" It was now Heidi's turn to be a little put out, and she said, "My name is not Miss, it is Heidi." "Quite so, but the same lady has ordered me to call you Miss," explained Sebastian. "Has she? Oh, then I must be called so," said Heidi submissively, for she had already noticed that whatever Fräulein Rottenmeier said was law. "Then now I have 3 names," she added with a sigh. "What was it little miss wanted to ask?" said Sebastian as he went on into the dining room to put away his silver. "How can a window be opened?" "Why, like that," said Sebastian, and he flung up one of the large windows. Heidi ran to it, but she was not tall enough to see out, for her head only reached the sill. "There, now Miss can look out and see what is going on below," said Sebastian, as he brought her a high wooden stool to stand on. Heidi climbed up and at last, as she thought, was going to see what she had been longing for, but she drew back her head with a look of great disappointment on her face. "Why, there is nothing outside but the stony streets," she said mournfully. "But if I went right round to the other side of the house, what should I see there, Sebastian?" "Nothing but what you see here," he told her. "Then where can I go to see right away over the whole valley?" "You would have to climb to the top of a high tower, a church tower, like that one over there with the gold ball above it. From there you can see right away, ever so far." Heidi climbed down quickly from her stool, ran to the door, down the steps, and out into the street. Things were not, however, quite so easy as she thought. Looking from the window, the tower had appeared so close that she imagined she had only to run over the road to reach it. But now, although she ran along the whole length of the street, she still did not get any nearer to it, and indeed, soon lost sight of it altogether. She turned down another street and went on, but still no tower. She passed a great many people, but they all seemed in such a hurry that Heidi thought they had not time to tell her which way to go. Then suddenly, at one of the street corners, she saw a boy standing carrying a hand organ on his back and a funny-looking animal on his arm. Heidi ran up to him and said, "Where is the tower with the gold ball on the top?" "I don't know," was his answer. "Who can I ask to show me?" she asked again. "I don't know." "Do you know any other church with a high tower?" "Yes, I know one." "Come then and show it to me." "Show me first what you will give me for it." And the boy held out his hand as he spoke. Heidi searched about in her pockets and presently drew out a card on which was painted a garland of beautiful red roses. She looked at it first for a moment or two, for she felt rather sorry to part with it. Clara had only that morning made her a present of it. But then, to look down into the valley and see all the lovely green slopes, "There," said Heidi, handing over the card. "Would you like to have that?" The boy drew back his hand and shook his head. "What would you like then?" asked Heidi, not sorry to put the card back in her pocket. And that's the end of the first half of chapter 7. And we'll read the second half of chapter 7 tomorrow. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.